One of the most frequently cited concerns in franchising involves litigation. Oftentimes I'm asked, isn't franchising litigious? Isn't there a lot of exposure to lawsuits and franchisee actions as part of franchising? And the fact of the matter is that concern is often overblown. First of all, a study done by FranData has shown that 27% of franchisors report any litigation on their disclosure documents at all. So 75% of franchisors aren't reporting any litigation at all. And a lot of the litigation that does get reported in disclosure documents involves litigation that may have nothing to do with franchising as a root cause. So the next question that really you should be asking yourself relative to the question of litigation involves, what kind of incremental exposure do I have as a franchisor? And that really comes in two different areas. One of the areas that it comes in involves the contract that you sign with your franchisee. A franchise contract tends to be a very one-sided document favoring the franchisor. And because of the fact that it is so one-sided, if you are meticulous in making sure that you always are truthful with your franchisees, that you're not misrepresenting numbers, you're not saying things that shouldn't be said, there remain very few ways in which you're going to be attacked from a contract standpoint from your franchisees. The only way that you would likely get involved in a lawsuit with your franchisees really involves whether you're committing fraud in the sales process. Fraud is almost always one of the core charges that gets brought if there is some kind of an action. So you just have to be very careful about making sure that you're monitoring your sales process, making sure that what you're saying in the sales process is always true and a good, accurate representation of what your franchise contract and franchise relationship is. That's really the first part of the litigation. The second part of litigation is really what we call vicarious liability, and that is liability that you might incur based on the actions that your franchisee might take in their location. So if someone goes into your location, they slip and fall, and they see that your name is on the door, they sue both you and the franchisee. Now, there's no proof against that type of a lawsuit. There's nothing that will prevent that kind of a lawsuit. But ultimately, the liability, if you have drafted your operations manual well, you've drafted your legal documents well, that you have not exercised too much control, you've not created what's called an agency relationship with your franchisee, you've not done anything negligent in the process, ultimately that liability rests with your franchisee. Moreover, that franchisee is going to carry insurance that's going to name you as a co-insured. So ultimately, it's important to understand that in litigation, what we're talking about is a trade-off. You do have a small amount of incremental contractual liability that could accrue to you if you were to violate the franchise contract, and you do have the opportunity to be involved in some kind of vicarious liability actions if something were to happen in your franchise location. But consider the alternative. The alternative is, unless your alternative is don't grow your business, your alternative is going to be to grow through company-owned operations, in which case you absolutely are going to have the liability for everything that goes on in that location. So that vicarious liability is no longer vicarious. That liability now accrues directly to you. And while you don't have a contract with your franchisee, you will have, in essence, a contract with your employees, and you'll have employment liability as opposed to contractual liability. And that employment liability can be broader based and further reaching. So you're really trading one type of liability for another type of liability if you're going to grow through company-owned operations versus franchising. And if you manage your company right, you can probably avoid most of that liability. My partner, Dave Hood, ran Auntie Anne's Pretzels for 9 years, and during that time grew the company from about 6 units to about 750 locations. And in that period of time, they had precisely 0 franchisee-initiated lawsuits. Since that time, since I've managed to bring Dave back on board here at iFranchise Group when they were sold some years ago. They've continued to grow Auntie Anne's Pretzels, and today, with 1,400 locations, they've still had 0 franchisee-initiated lawsuits. So litigation is not a part and parcel to franchising. Now, I don't want you to take any of what I've said here as legal advice. I certainly want to make sure that you get good legal advice in franchising, and at the iFranchise Group, we're happy to give you referrals to attorneys who can address this subject in a lot more detail. We're not a law firm. So we're happy to give you a referral to some attorneys and law firms that can address this in as much detail as you'd like. But if you take a deep look at the question, I think that what you will find is that litigation in franchising is certainly not as big an issue as many people think that it is. And it is largely avoidable through good franchisee relations, good communications, and honesty and transparency in the sales process. If you'd like to learn more about franchising, we have a free DVD on how to franchise your business that you can get at www.ifranchisegroup.com, or you can call us at 708-957-2300.